Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. I hope you've got a cup of coffee. You can sit around the table and just join our conversation. I have a lovely lady with me today, my friend Wilma Derksen. So thanks, Wilma, for joining us today.
Thank you, Linda, for having me.
It's such a privilege to hear more of your story. And I know you've got a lot of stories. I know that. So just excited to learn more about you and yeah, just thanks for your time for being here with us. So I looked it up. Now you have been a writer for a long time.
Mhm.
That's who you are. You took some creative communications classes and you've been a journalist. So where did that start?
Well, that started because our family was growing and we had financial, responsibilities. And I needed to go out and work, and I wanted to do my profession. I wanted to do a career. So when my children were really quite old, 12, 9, and 1, I went back to school and took my creative communications course, which
Very
was
good.
journalism course, and then started my journalism course for an independent newspaper. It was really wonderful.
Well, and that sounds like a fun way of being at home with your family and working at the same time.
Yes, yes. I did freelancing as well before that. That was really great, but then I needed to do something more direct. It made a bit more money.
Well, very good. Very good. Now, a lot of now you were married to Cliff and you were pastors. That's
Yeah.
correct. Hmm.
He was a pastor, but at the time that this all happened to us, he was a camp director. And
Okay.
that was his real love, is being a camp director and just being on call during the summer was just lovely for him.
Ah, great. So now in 1984, um, there was quite a tragic situation that happened to your family. So how old were your kids at that time and what was going on that led into this?
Okay, we were just an ordinary family, honest, just plain doing our life. And Candace was 19, Candace was 19, Odie was 9, and Cyrus was about 2 years old, just going on 3. And Candace called me from school and said she wanted to ride home, and I usually gave one to her on Friday afternoons. But I was very busy. I was freelancing at the time, and so I said I asked her if she'd come walk home, and she said yes. And it was nice and warm, and November 30th. It was quite warm, and so she wanted to walk home. And she didn't come home. She just disappeared on her way home from school. And that changed everything for us. We
Well,
were
that
frantic.
and that would be frightening when she doesn't come home.
Well, because we just knew Candace was a people person. Her best friend was coming in the next day. We knew she wasn't a runaway. So we had this sickening feeling that somebody was after her. Because, Candace was the kind of person that had a lot of charisma. She would just walk down the street and people would notice her. So I was
Okay.
always a little worried, being young and 13 years old, that what would she attract?
I'm
So
sorry, she's 13 at this time?
it was 13 when she disappeared.
13, okay.
Just that she was a child in a woman's body. It's so vulnerable. And we were just, we knew almost instinctively that something terrible had happened. So we called the police that night. We called all her friends. We just searched. We did everything. We went into a panic mode almost immediately. And we
And
searched
this was in just to clarify, this was in Winnipeg that this
Winnipeg.
happened. Okay.
And the warm weather changed that night. It went from, just a balmy, what we would consider balmy, -7 to 20 below that night.
Okay.
So we were scared for the weather. We were scared about the streets she was walking home on. And during that time, we thought that the community was safe. So we had no real fear until it happened to us. And then it sparked a 7-week hunt for her, just intense,
Oh, 7 weeks.
7 weeks. And people knew Cass because she was always at camp. So when Cliff was camp director, she was camp at the camp all summer. So and it was a large camp. So everybody in Winnipeg knew Candace. and and they knew that how connected she was with Heidi that was coming in the next day. So everybody just knew. We just all instinctively knew that something terrible had happened. And we were just sick. And we looked for her for 7 weeks. And then her body was found in a shack. not that far from our place. Her hands and feet had been tied. She had died of exposure that night. Somebody had taken her, a stranger had taken her to a shack and we knew nothing. And and that led to a 22-year search for the person who done it. After 22 years only, the mystery, we lived with the mystery for 22 years.
It took that long?
It took that long. And then a man was just, they arrested a man and went to trial, and there was a conviction of second-degree murder. But then it went through the appeal process and ended up with an acquittal of 10 years. It took a decade for the whole trial to end with an acquittal. We still believed he did it. We just, there was so many circumstantial evidence that could be proven, and you just know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so we had to realize that it was going to be acquitted, and he's now has an $8.5 million suit for wrongful conviction. So it doesn't end, and this is ongoing.
No, it would just feel like this nightmare hasn't ended.
No, it hasn't ended. We never know when our name is going to be in the paper, when Candace's picture will be in the paper again.
So it was the day the body was found, that the paper mentioned that you were choosing to forgive.
Well, it happened that at the day that her body was found, everybody came to our house, the whole search committee, everybody just landed. We all had to get together. We were crying. We were, in a sense, there was a relief that we had found her body, but this terrible grief that she was never going to be coming home.
Yeah.
So we had that, and then the guests left around 10 o'clock at night, I would say. And then there was a knock on the door, and we went to answer it. And the man said, I'm here to tell you what's going to happen next. So we invited him to the kitchen table, and there for 2 hours he told us in vivid detail what had happened to him after the murder of his daughter. He pulled out pills, and he put them on the table, and said, my health's been destroyed. My mental health, I can't work anymore. I've lost the relationships with my family. I've lost everything, absolutely everything. He said, I've even lost the memory of my daughter. And that just horrified us. So we sat there for 2 hours, traumatized by this man.
Yeah.
Who was, describing the worst nightmare of all, and saying, here we had thought we had experienced the worst, telling us that it wasn't over and it would be even getting worse for us. So we went to bed that night after he left. We had guests in the house, and we went to bed, and Cliff got ready, and I got ready, and then we stood at the foot of the bed, and we couldn't get into the bed. There was a presence on the bed. The trauma of the man and this often happens with people. They can't go to sleep after. They have something in the room. It's trauma. And so Cliff and I couldn't get into bed. We just looked at each other, and both of us were raised on forgiveness as being the way to mental health. And so we just said, we're going to forgive. And you know what, Linda? That presence left the bed.
Wow. Wow.
So we could actually get into the bed and sleep, which is a miracle. So when the press media called us, and we held a press conference, and we told all of Winnipeg, we love you. Thank you for helping us find Candace. I'll come to the funeral because we have to grieve her because she's gone. This beautiful soul is gone. And then they said, okay, yes, but what about the murderer? What are you going to do with the murderer? And we didn't know who it was. All we knew it was probably a stranger because of the crime scene. We knew it was somebody that didn't know her.
Okay.
And we knew that much only. And he says, oh, we're going to forgive. Because that was our answer. That had moved the presence from the bed. That had allowed us to sleep.
Yeah.
So that was going to be the answer that we're gonna now take with us. We were going to forgive. We had no idea what that meant. None. And of course everybody was astounded. They had no idea. They thought that we were really going to forgive the murderer and develop relationship. We had nothing. We were just forgiving the trauma. We were so single-minded. And then the next day the papers, that's what the headline was. This couple's gonna forgive, and everybody just couldn't believe it. That at that stage we were already saying we're gonna forgive.
But that wouldn't have been the automatic response from most people.
No, they say that actually the research shows that to forgive the murder of a child, and to forgive the sexual molestation of a child, is almost impossible to forgive. So here we were in the face of all of this saying, we're going to forgive, not really comprehending what we had chosen. It's kind of like I kind of compare it to, getting married where you go in front of the audience, we say, we're going to love each other, we're going to get married, we're going to belong to each other. And then you find out what that means.
Right.
Here we
Right.
had confessed to the world that we were going to forgive and had no practical understanding of really what that meant.
And that's probably good because it is a process and there's layers.
Huge. And making that choice, making that commitment to it, and then being held accountable to it was the perfect way to live for us. No, I mean, perfect given that it was a dreadful situation to begin with. But for us, in hindsight, it was life-giving for us to be able to say, we're going to forgive, we're going to forgive, we're going to forgive.
Yeah. And I mean, the options aren't good. Like you said, with this man, the alternative isn't good. It's not hopeful. There's no life in it.
No, and then
So,
we met all these parents of murdered children after that because it kind of became a group. And we saw it over and over and over again. The way that something like this can take a child's life, but it can also take the life of the parents and the siblings and so many, because in injustice of that magnitude, that innocence, the innocence of a child being murdered by the hand of somebody with evil intentions is just too much for us to bear.
it's a lot for parents. Yeah, I can't imagine. I'm so sorry that this has happened. You've been an extreme example of teaching forgiveness to people who don't know how to do it.
Well, I think we've tried now because it was kind of the solution, became kind of our way of dealing with it and kept us moving forward because you can get so stuck,
Right.
And okay.
I was just thinking, as a Christian, we're called to love one another. It's easy to love people who love us. It's harder to love people who don't, but it's really hard to learn how to love Judas
Yes, the
and
real
and
people.
and to forgive evil. Exactly. Yeah.
But I think that what I learned also was that it was hard to forgive the murderer and the evil. It was also very hard to forgive the police for not having
Oh,
looked for Candace that night. And all the people that had said that they would help us. There were a lot of mistakes being made. So there's a lot of hardship to forgive the police. And you know what? It was really hard to forgive myself. And the anniversary of the day that Candace disappeared, I all of a sudden was filled with the dread of the day, the anniversary, the memories that our body remembers. And so Cliff went down to work. He's a workaholic. And I started to wash the walls. I have no idea why I washed the wall. I'm not a wall washer. I'm not a domestic person. I don't do that. And here I was washing the walls down. I came across her fingerprints on the
oh,
stairway.
oh,
Reminder of her fingerprints. There was only one person that was tall enough to reach up and touch that place of swinging down into the main floor. It was only Candace's fingerprints. And I knew that was her fingerprints, and the guilt and the symbolic guilt of those fingerprints and everything hit me. And I thought, if I had picked her up, none of this would have happened. And so I had to forgive myself. And then the relief of that, and the release of that, and that the forgiveness comes around to visit us too. It's beautiful. So forgiveness is an all-encompassing and beautiful healing.
Well, and with grief, it hits everybody in the family in a different way because
Yeah.
everybody in the family would have a different relationship with her. So how did your kids do?
Well, Cyrus was a bit too young. He was only 2 going on 3 at the time. And he went through grief. And we saw it happening again and again. He's had his own journey. But I think what more obvious was Odia because she was relying on on Candace. Candace was the older, the stronger, the athletic one that was the force behind that family, actually. And so she had to forgive Candace for leaving and leaving her alone. She had abandonment issues with Candace.
Okay.
And so she had to forgive her for that. And we
Okay.
all had to forgive, people for saying the wrong things and for doing the wrong things. was constant. And Cliff and I had to forgive each other a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, forgiveness is, it's a big topic, and it affects our entire lives.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. So now when it actually went to trial, you said that was years later. How did that play out?
Well, by this time, we as a family had almost resolved our situation. We had developed some kind of normalcy, and the kids are older now, like Odia and Cyrus were adults now. And we had learned that in this group that I was part of, Parents that Murdered Children, that they could handle the murder. But when it came to trial, the trial process was so dehumanizing, so minimalizing, that they would come out of the trial system angrier than when they went in. And I
And
think it's
and re-traumatized.
totally re-traumatized.
Yeah.
And so, it's one thing to forgive somebody who intentionally and it might be dysfunctional for killing somebody. But there is something about, putting your faith in the systems and then having your systems fail you. So we even knew this before going into this whole situation. It was 22 years later. We had learned enough to know that we couldn't put our hopes in this. And so I remember Odie and I walking up to the courthouse and saying, "Oh, we don't want this to happen. We don't want this to happen." And it was. We actually went on a trip together with the kids to regroup, to talk about how we're going to face this. It was a time of real team building, but it brought out everything. I remember when they brought out her jeans and everything, all that she'd been
Ooh.
wearing. But it was like going back and having the person accused in the room as we were going through all this. I remember one time when I just was the shock of seeing her stuff and realizing that day, all of those emotions, they never really leave us. And having to deal with it and then looking up and there is looking at that connection that I didn't know what was behind his eyes, but none of it was good. And just the vulnerability of those moments of having to go through the grief all over again in total public places, going into the washroom and there's no privacy anywhere. We've now established a Candace house so that there is privacy because of what we learned. People do need a place. The offenders have a big house, a halfway house. They have whole houses all over the place. But the victims didn't have a house. So when they asked us what we needed when going through this, we said we need a house. So
Okay.
they've established Candace house.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Candace House. So that was established, what, 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yes, it took a long time to conceptualize it and raise the money for it, but it became a real house 5 years ago. We're
Okay.
celebrating the anniversary of it this year.
And that's specifically for families that are going to court as the victim?
Yes, it's about a block away from the courthouse, and people can run over there, and they have a living room that is all their own. That they can meet as a family. There's a bit of a bedroom where they can sleep and have a nap during the sessions. There's washrooms, private washrooms, and they now have even offices where you can meet with the prosecutors or the defense or whatever you need, or the police that you need to, and even the media. So it's really, oh, it's amazing. And we've discovered that just the support of the people around at that time, the privacy and the support and the resources, and just even the value being honored. Because we would walk into the courtroom and they would say hi to the offender, the prosecutors, the defense, the jury. They said they acknowledged everybody in the room, but never once mentioned us. Never once. We go to Walmart and we're recognized. We go
Right,
anywhere, we're greeted.
right.
But here in the most important time of our lives, most vulnerable, we were ignored completely, almost as if we shouldn't be there. They didn't want us to show any emotion or do anything because in case it would somehow shift the balance of power or something. But yet, we were real, we were normal, we were human beings, and we need support. We need a lot of support. And so to have this house now where there is support, guaranteed support, and for the entire family, and have the family communicate, because it's also a time of fragmentation of the families that can happen too as well.
Oh, well, if you're sitting in the courtroom for hours and hours with nowhere to go, that'll be difficult to be able to communicate how you're receiving all this information. And so having Candace House, you'd be able to go back there and just debrief as a family.
Debrief and then have facilitators to help you debrief it and to explain the processes, because you're walking into a different culture when you walk into the courtroom. They have a different vocabulary, they have different manners, different customs. And so to have that explained at that time, and then to have the support and the encouragement and the experience of the people around, it's huge, just huge.
Wow. Well, you've given a huge gift to the city in memory of Candace.
Yes, in some ways I feel this was Candace's value, her purpose in life was to give this house. Beautiful.
Well, certainly a legacy, a memory.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do have another story about that. The year before Candace was abducted, maybe even just months before, she was babysitting. And she called me over. She says, Mom, I'm scared. Candace was never scared. She was just one of these people that just never showed any fear. She loved people. She loved these kids. She says, Mom, I'm scared. I sat down and I asked her why. We were sitting in the living room, we put the kids to bed. And she says, well, she says, I watched this movie. I wasn't supposed to watch it. I know you didn't want me to watch it, but I did. And it was about murder. And she says, after that, I've been afraid of murder. And she had a dream or something. And so we talked about it. And I says, well, Candace, you just have to give it to God. God will protect you. And she looked at me and her eyes, she was an adult by this time, understanding it of an adult. She says, Mom, you can't tell me that God protects us. Bad things do happen to good people. Oh, I was just thought, the Sunday school answers are gone when I need them most, right? So I says, well, we had learned that we had experienced some violence in our own lives when we were trying to be missionaries, and we had realized one way to deal with violence is that we can give our lives to God, and we can also give our deaths to God.
Mhm.
And if we give our deaths to God and we are killed prematurely, then God will make our death have as much impact as our life. So when she was murdered, of course I remember this story, and I thought, oh God, you and I are in such deep trouble.
Yeah.
I promised Candace that her death, her murder, would have as much impact as life.
Well, it certainly has.
Yes, it has. And I think this is a beautiful example of how God can take something so tragic and turn it into something so beautiful and
Yeah.
life-giving, symbolically and in reality.
And we do have free will. So the man who did kill her had free will to do what he wanted, or what he wanted to do.
Exactly. Exactly. We have free will, and we cherish this free will. But then there's consequences, but yet if we give it to God, then He steps in with His authority and empowers that which is good in the story, and
Yeah.
and multiplies it by 100.
Wow. So now, when the person who was found guilty, when it went back to court later, the whole trial had to happen over again.
Yes.
No, that was just a couple of years ago. And I thought it was really interesting how you and your family processed in court, with your creativity, because you're a very creative family. And it was, if I remember correctly, there was different colors for your emotions.
Oh, my daughter, an adult now, when we were going into court, we all said, how are we going to deal with it? We're going to be sitting there, spending time in that room, and it's going to be traumatic. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
As an artist, so he started sketching. And I was a writer, so I was writing my books, taking notes. Cyrus is a prophet, kind of preacher, minister, psychologist. So he took his shoes off and was in prayer. And he walked around the courtroom in prayer. And Odia was a crocheter. She's an artist like her father, but she's a domestic or lifestyle kind of artist. So she crochets. So what she was doing was crocheting these discs, and every day she would crochet. If it was a calm day, it would be green. If she was mad, she'd red. And if it was evil or dark or traumatic, she'd crochet black. And so there was so many days, and so and then we had an art show where she displayed this, and we framed these discs of the life, discs of the day, and very vivid, very vivid, pictorial way of expressing emotions. And I think that's how we needed to survive.
Well, it's so important to be able to just release what's inside of us.
Yeah,
And like you said, everyone in your family was creative in a different way. So to be able to just express that in a different way, just to release it, that's important.
and to do it intentionally, realizing that everything
Yes.
that's been given to us needs to have a creative outlet. We need to work at it because it's been given to us. No, it can happen to us. Evil happens. But through God, we can make it into a creative moment. And the moment then becomes an artistic moment. And I think that's what we try to do.
So you're the writer,
Yes.
and you've been writing a few books now.
Yes.
And also Cliff did a writing, was it memoirs?
Yes.
You've got
Yeah.
his book there. And do you want to just mention about Cliff?
Well, Cliff has died, and and so just before he left us, he had taken my writing course 2 times to help me administer it. And as he was taking my course, he was doing it. So he was he was forced, he's an artist, he's a sculptor actually, but he was also being forced in some ways to write his life story. So when he was dying, he decided to take his life and make it into blogs. So this is his book that we published after he was dead. It's Chasing the Light, and it's a blogged series of how his life, his entire life, and it is magnificent. And he goes through it. See, Cliff was another type of victim in all of this. He wasn't only the father, and a father has its own, and he had bonded with Candace, had a special relationship with her, but with it, where there was no evidence of anybody, and it was a stranger abduction. It always becomes the family becomes suspect, and he was considered a suspect at one point. And he took a lie detector test. Can you imagine that? The insult of that.
Yeah.
And we noticed that people would say, "Okay, where was Candace?" and all that, and then they said, "Where was Clint?"
Oh,
There'd always be this
this
un-
underlying,
suspicion. Just
yeah.
I don't think people meant to be like that, but it was just kind of okay. Now where's the person that did this, right? And so he had to live with that, and had to make something out of that as well. And he did. And the stories are remarkable. It's a male, masculine way of doing things. Mine was female and his was masculine. And that way it's a real contribution, I think, to the whole story of forgiveness as well.
Well, and as a father, that's a protective role.
Yes, yes.
That's what the father does. The mother is the nurturer, and the father's the protector. So that must have been very, very difficult.
I remember at the time we were selecting the coffin, and then the funeral director says, and would you like a vault, cement vault for the coffin to keep the coffin safe? And I thought that was redundant. That was way too much. I mean, it's going to deteriorate. And Candace wasn't there anymore. And yet Cliff had health protection wrong. And so he wanted the vault, so he had it. For something, that just was, like you said, he needed to feel protective of her. This was his modeling or his way of visiting that question,
Right.
and had to deal with that.
Well, to feel like he's done everything he could do.
Exactly. And we had to understand that. And so we all deal with it differently. I had to do my thing and he had to do his thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes they were at odds, right? And there was one time when all of this anger came out and he just changed. He never was violent towards me, but he was violent towards boxes and empty boxes and things like that. And then he realized how angry he was. His anger came out. He's a very peaceful Mennonite man.
Yeah.
couldn't believe the anger and that came out in him. And my children says, "Why did you help Dad?" And I said, "I can't help him. I can help other people, but I can't help my father, my husband. And you can't help your father. We have to let go through it." And he did. He memorized the whole book of Jonah to rewire his brain. And he started to do images and he started to do art in a very, very serious way to get rid of this.
Okay. Is that when he started doing the sculpting, or was he doing that before?
He was doing it before, but it was part of it. Yeah, it was the sculpting was a way of constantly, creatively working through his emotions.
It was very detailed. I saw his work at a show one time. So very detailed, incredible talent.
And incredible, shows a lot of emotion, right? Incredible anger in some of those, and then joy. There's laughter too. There's David dancing. There's the Throne of Swords. Every bit of emotion are in those sculptures. Just beautiful.
Wow. So what would be your big life lesson through all of that?
Oh, just forgive. And forgiveness isn't one time. Like it's kind of like a river. Life is like a river, and you dip your toe in the water of a river, and it's never the same water. It's always flowing. So you never really. Every moment is another issue, and we're multi-layered. There's 4 parts to us. There's the mind, body, heart, and spirit, and each layer of us has to forgive it in its own way. My body remembered. My body had to forgive. My relationships had to forgive. My mind had to be rewired. And my spirit had to imagine with God a whole new way of doing life. So it is a complicated process. And so I think that's probably what my big mission in life has been, is to say it's complicated, you're never finished, but it is a process that is totally worth doing, because we as a family remained loving. At this stage in life, we could see how forgiveness helped. Before, we never knew if it would. We were in the middle of anger. We said, "Is it going to work? Is it going to work?"
Yeah.
But now at the end of life, I can say, yes, yes, yes. Just forgive. Just learn to forgive. Just keep walking towards it. And it will have its own beauty and its own joys at certain times. And sometimes we're celebrating forgiveness. Sometimes we're just plain doing it. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we're just still struggling and not victorious, but we're still struggling.
Well, and even if you didn't feel like it, you knew you had to.
Yes, it's a goal.
Yeah.
We're not going to divorce. We're going to keep on loving and forgiving each other. We're going to keep on loving and forgiving the murderer, the accused. We're going to keep on loving the systems. We're going to keep on loving. We're going to go and hide when we have to work through some stuff. We're going to come out and love, love, love.
Yeah. And there was likely situations that you would have associated with the event as well.
Totally. And there was huge anger I remember one time somebody saying, "Okay, now where would there be justice in this? Tell me." And they wanted me to be honest. So I said, "Well, it wouldn't be enough for one man to die for what he did, because he'd be guilty. He's guilty, and Candace was innocent. Candace was beautiful. He's evil, right? There's no justice justice isn't even enough to help with this." So then I went down deep into my broken heart, and I said, 10 child murders would have to die. 10. And I saw them lined up in my mind's eye. And then I said, and I would have to pull the trigger. And I pulled it 10 times, and it felt delicious. That's how big our anger can be. And then to say, okay, I can't go here. I don't want this. I don't want to kill 10 men for my one pain, one daughter. I want there to be life rather than death and all of this. And so that's when I had to forgive, and say, these men have mothers, these men have people. We all do stupid things. We all destroy in some way or other. We keep needing to forgive and give life to the situation rather than death. And the only way we can do that is through forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's going to be difficult for a lot of people, but it's a process we do need to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. So your story, I'm sure, has encouraged people, just that you've come out the other side of it.
Yes.
Of course, the event was difficult, traumatic, but the alternatives, like you said, the man his life fell apart. So by by and through love and forgiveness. And that's the main qualities of walking with Jesus. Just being able to love and forgive.
I know, and to see my children thriving. My
Mhm.
son, a psychologist, has turned out to be a pastor, and my daughter is she's an amazing executive vice president of culture and people in a big company, and she's married to a pastor chaplain type person. And my grandchildren all love the Lord. They've all been baptized this last summer. I have
Blessings.
blessings upon blessings that I am now reaping because we forgave. We just constantly forgave.
Yeah, that's great. So there's a lot of power in writing too. There's a lot, the creative process, and you've continued to write. Now you have a new book that you just published.
Well, I think at this time in life, I can do what I want.
You can.
I'm a therapist still, and I and I do talk about forgiveness, but all of that is kind of behind me now. So now finally I can do what I want. And I think losing Cliff was breaking my heart. So I needed to find a new joy. So I went back to what I wanted to do when I was a child. When I was a child, I read Grace Livingston Hill, who's a romance writer. And I loved her. And I always wanted to be a romance writer. I wanted to be a Danielle Steele, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I would try. And 20 years ago, I even tried one and failed though, because I did focus group it, and everybody fell in love with the wrong character. So writing romance isn't that easy. I thought it would be easy, but
No.
and so this so
Excuse
it's
me.
come up again, and they needed a book from me, and I didn't have any ready at the time. But I said, well, I do have this book, and my son said he loved my book, actually, my romance book. So he said, "Mom, pull it out. Let's look at it again." So I redid it, and now I just published it, and it's a romance book. It's a romance, historical romance, and this is it. It's so fun.
And that's Lavish Mercy.
Savage Mercy. It's a historical romance book set in the Kuban, southern Russia setting, and it's in a Mennonite village and by the Black Sea. So it has all the Mennonite culture in it, and this beautiful romance in it. And it's about this young girl who has nothing. She's kind of like a Cinderella case where she's living in this, very hostile environment at home. And then she finds out that the Tsar has actually hidden some imperial treasures in her house and in her mother. So she has access to the secrets of where this treasure is. And so she has to find it. There's all this pressure for her to find it, and all the violence around that. And it's just fun.
Oh,
And
wow.
she meets this wonderful Mennonite young businessman who has all kinds of doubts about her because she's just so straight. And he falls in love with her, and they have this wonderful romance.
Well, don't give us the ending.
Okay, well, it's a romance.
It's a romance.
I understand it's a page turner.
Well, that sounds really intriguing it's in Russia. It's written in Russia.
It's in 1904. It was written in the period of 1904 in Russia.
In Russia.
A beautiful village. I went to see it. It's where my family came from.
That's really good. And it's available on Amazon.
Yes, and Nellie Robinson in Winnipeg.
Okay, so I will leave the link below for people who are listening here, and they can catch your book on Amazon then. And is there a way to contact you if anyone wanted to get a hold of you?
Yes, I like my email address, derksenwilma@gmail.com. It's very simple. DERKSEN Wilma at gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from anybody.
Okay, well, I'll link that as
Oh,
well.
and I've written another one already. So there's going to be two. This is book one, and there's two.
And when is that one going to be published?
Oh, I'm just finished it, the draft. So
Okay.
it'll take a bit for me to finish it, but it's
Okay,
coming. It's there. It was fun.
Well, we'll look forward to that one too. Thank you so much for your time, Wilma. I know your story is going to be inspiring a lot of people today, bringing people hope that there is hope for tomorrow.
Mhm.
You know, no matter what we go through, there's hope for tomorrow. We're not alone.
No, we're not alone. And thank you, Linda. This was wonderful talking to you.
Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye for now. God bless you.